everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my Booktube Prize rankings and reviews for the final round in nonfiction. Finally, I'm a little bit late with this, and that is due to the fact that I've been ill and October has been super busy so far this month. So we're just gonna do it now. And a lot of these books I had already read in previous rounds of the Booktube Prize because I did read exclusively nonfiction for the 2022 Booktube Prize. So I am not going to go into these books in great detail because I've already talked about many of them in earlier rounds. And I will say there was only one book that I had to read in this finals round. The other thing I will say right off the top is the 6 books that were in the finals were all good books. There were no stinkers in this bunch. They were just books that I liked personally more than others, and I will get into the reasons why I ranked them the way that I did. And so let's just get into it. The very first book is the book, I'm going to rank these from my least favorite to my most favorite. So from number 6 to number 1. And this is the ranking that I gave in my ballot for the finals. In 6th place, I put Facing the Mountain by Daniel James Brown. This was the only book that I had not read previous to the finals round. It is a historical nonfiction about Japanese Americans who fought for the United States during World War II, how they were treated, and it also details how society was treating Japanese Americans in general during World War II. It goes into how Japanese Americans were placed in internment camps, how Japanese Americans from Hawaii were treated differently than Japanese Americans who lived on the mainland. And that topic, I think, is an extremely important topic. I did not learn very much about this when I was in school, and so I am glad to see that more attention is being placed on this very important part of U.S. history. The problem that I had with this book is probably the same thing that you've heard many people talk about when they talk about this book is the book didn't seem to know what kind of a book it wanted to be, whether it wanted to be a military history or a social issue or sort of very specifically about Japanese Americans and how they were treated in the United States. So the book kind of has 2 parts. And the parts that were about how Japanese Americans were treated at this time, how the internment camps worked, the indignities and the discriminations and the racial injustices that were perpetuated upon Japanese American people at this time. That part was all fascinating to me. But when it came to this particular group of young Japanese American men who formed a particular battalion who went to fight in the European theater during World War II, and the descriptions and details of the battles that they fought, was not interested in that. I'm not a person that cares about the intricacies of which troop moved here and which tanks were sent there and how long it took to capture a particular hill and all the blood and gore involved in who died and who lived and all that. That's not what I want to read about. And I found those parts of the book to be quite tedious. So for me, that's why Facing the Mountain was in slot 6 for this final round. In slot 5 was Chasing Me to My Grave by Winifred Rembrandt, as told to Aaron Kelly. This is an artist's memoir of living in the Jim Crow South, and this was a very affecting memoir. I really thought that this was excellently done. I think the book itself is really interesting. The format is almost like a coffee table book with full page color reproduction of Winifred Rembrandt's art, and I think that elevated this memoir beyond what it would have been just as a memoir. So Winifred Rembrandt was born in the early part of the 20th century in the South, and he experienced, of course, a lot of discrimination. He got involved in the civil rights movement and was subject to a lot of violence. In fact, he was almost killed in a lynching. He survived that lynching, was subsequently put in jail, and ended up on a chain gang. And this was all as a very young man, just survived horrific treatment in prison and on this chain gang. And while he was on the chain gang, he happened to be working in an area, working on roads or something, and met the woman who would eventually become his wife. And so the second half of the book is his after the prison, and once he gets out and he convinces this young woman to marry him and they start their life together, Rembrandt does not like automatically have a smooth and uneventful life. There's a lot of problems, but while he was in prison, he learned to make art with leather and leather making tools, and then to paint on this leather. And it's just absolutely stunning, his art. And his art depicts the things that he went through as a Black man growing up in Jim Crow South. And it's just heartbreaking and heart-wrenching and just amazing. And so this story was just absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I rank this book a 4 stars. It's a 4-star read for me. It's a wonderful book. I encourage you all to read it. It just happened to fall in 5th place compared to the other books that I read. In 5th place, excuse me. And then in 4th place, I ranked Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. This actually is the only book in the finals that I read prior to the prize round starting. I read this mostly all in one day on New Year's Eve day, the December 31st last year. And I read this in a rage. I was so enraged by this book of this family who are the family who started to sell opioids like OxyContin, and the methodology that they employed to sell this drug that was highly addictive. And while maybe in the beginning they didn't know that, certainly they did know it later on, and they continued their unscrupulous sales process in order to make money. And it is just absolutely enraging. The book is highly, highly detailed about this family. It goes back to previous to the current Sacklers, and tells about the 3 brothers who originally came here to America and started the business, and then the next generation, which are the ones that were involved with the selling of opioids, and how that led to the opioid crisis that currently exists in the United States. Patrick Radden Keefe, I really like his writing. I read his book, Say Nothing, excuse me. Say Anything is a movie. Say Nothing, the year that it won the Booktube prize, and I thought that was a truly excellent book. He really can take a topic and delve into it and just get into every nook and cranny of the story and bring all the details to life. And some people don't like all of that detail and all of that extra that he brings to the story, but I find it really engaging and readable, and in this case, absolutely enraging, and just could not put it down while I was reading it. So this book ended up in the 4th position for me, because I do think, it is really long. It probably could have been told in a more succinct manner. I didn't mind the extra detail, but I think that I can see how it would be off-putting. But again, this was a 4.5 star read for me. Then in 3rd place, so these are the 3 that I thought were the very, very best of all the nonfiction that I read in this round. So in the 3rd position was Little Devil in America, Notes on Black Performance by Hanif Abdurraqib, and I loved this book. It's a collection of essays, and it is absolutely beautiful. It hit every emotion for me. Like, I felt everything while I was reading this book. I felt joy, I felt sorrow, I cried, I was enraged, I laughed. I mean, I just couldn't have enjoyed myself anymore in reading a book. It was just delightful. It was so delightful. There was so many things in there that I didn't know about. It does, it's talking a lot about different vocal performers, singers, but it also talks about funeral, the culture around funerals in Black America. It talks about dancing and dance-off competitions. Just all kinds of things having to do with performance, sports, acting, just lots of stuff. And it just imbues every emotion in those essays. And then in between the essays about sort of general cultural issues in the United States, the author talks about his own personal life and things that he's experienced that have to do with Black performance. And I thought it was just absolutely brilliantly done. It was just immensely, immensely entertaining and readable. And I am so thankful that the Booktube Prize brought me to this book, because I don't know that I would have ever picked it up otherwise. And I think that the reason that it was elevated for me over Empire of Pain is because throughout, I was enraptured with this book. I just was in love with it the whole way through. There was never any part where I was like, oh, I don't know about this section, or this maybe is a little too much. Never in this book at all. It was just absolute joy 100% throughout, and I will be reading much more by this author in the future. And then my two favorite books, 2 and 1, it was really difficult for me to pick which book to put in which slot. They're both 5-star reads for me, both 2 of the best books that I've read so far this year. In second position is Under a White Sky, The Nature of the Future by Elizabeth Kolbert. I love Elizabeth Kolbert. I think she is a tremendous science writer. She really is able to bring very complex environmental issues to the public, to the general public, in a way that is intensely readable and understandable. And I thought that this grouping of writings about how humans have impacted our environment and how we are trying to deal with those problems today, how we're trying to correct past wrongs, and if we're able to do that or not able to do that, I thought it was just completely engrossing and entertaining. I didn't actually read this for the Booktube prize, any particular round. I read it as a buddy read with Britta Bowler, and we both just absolutely loved it. I think if you are interested in reading about science issues, but you're not interested in reading like hard science and like really specific biological details, Elizabeth Kolbert is a great writer to read because she brings issues to light in a way that really is really accessible for the general reader, and just, again, writes with a lot of humor. She brings in a lot of information about the people who are involved in the different projects that's interesting and entertaining. So it's not just a either a dry recitation of facts or like a completely depressing, like, oh God, we're all, it's not going to end well kind of thing, which it may not end well, but it's not Elizabeth Kolbert's intention to make you depressed. Instead, she is bringing you this information in an informative but entertaining way. And I thought this was really, really well done. I really enjoyed my time spent with that. And again, 5-star read for me. And then, of course, that means that my number one book for the round was How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. In this book, Clint Smith travels around the United States and, in fact, to West Africa to go to different locations and try to understand how those historical sites or places where tourists come are dealing with the question of slavery or the issue of slavery, whether or not they actually do address it straight on and accurately with historical fact, or whether they just don't address it at all, they don't discuss it because it's too controversial, or whether it's somewhere in between. And because he is Black himself, I think he comes at this with a very, he has a direct connection with this, and it's really interesting to see how he is met in some of these places by the people who are running these historical sites, how they interact with him. That's very interesting. It's also interesting to see how he interacts with other people who are there to learn about that historical site or to take a tour or what have you. I think it's really interesting to think about what is generally known in the public about slavery and how this country operated throughout much of its early history. There was stuff in here that I did not know about, and I have read quite widely in this particular topic area, particularly the section that was about New York City and the slave markets in New York City, I think was really highly informative. When we think about slavery, we often think that it was a Southern United States issue, and it certainly was not just in the South. So that was really, I think this book is so important. Again, very readable, but also incredibly, incredibly important information. I think this is one of the central issues today in the United States, right? Is like whether we're willing to look head on at our history, at the true history of this country, or whether we want to continue to look away from that history and its implications. And I am a I am a strong advocate of looking right at it and learning about it as much as you can, and then applying what you've learned to current issues and problems. And I think Clint Smith is trying to rectify the issue of looking away from the slavery question. So yeah, it should be required reading for all Americans, in my opinion. So these books were wonderful. I had a fabulous time, as always, participating in the Booktube Prize. I want to thank Robert, the founder and the organizer of the Booktube Prize, for all of his hard work and all of the efforts he puts into making this prize run smoothly. It is a humongous, tremendous undertaking that he works extremely hard at, and I'm very, very appreciative of that. I hope that if you have any interest at all in the Booktube Prize, that you will join us in 2023 for the judging process. Look for signups to happen sometime before the end of the year, and I will, of course, bring that sign up announcement to your attention on this channel at some point whenever that is announced. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read, and I will talk to you later.